Welcome back to the Maker's Playbook. This week we are changing things up just a little bit. When I first sat down with Gloria, we got into a big conversation on the incredibly important subject of cultural appropriation in the ceramics world. However, this topic is obviously much bigger than just what the two of us discussed. And frankly, I didn't do it justice that it deserves. So, we're saving that initial conversation to be included as part of a larger discussion here on the podcast with multiple makers. I mention this now because you'll hear us reference our first chat a couple of times in this recording. But first and foremost, I'm really excited for all of you to virtually, or rather audibly, meet Gloria and the work that she's doing not only as a contemporary artist working within traditional practices, but also as an educator herself, and how her teaching work helps inform her own making practice, but also allows her the much-needed time to explore and research ideas to make something. Not to mention the tricky balance she navigates between allowing students to explore their own creative practices and break the rules, quote-unquote, as us artists are so prone to do, but at the same time helping them find a balance of all that rule breaking alongside a deep appreciation and respect for the generations of knowledge that has been passed down to create specific styles of making. And from true masters in this craft who we don't often hear about simply because they aren't Instagram famous. But that's a whole other conversation, and there's some amazing projects already in the works, especially in the ceramics world, beginning to address that situation. So I'm going to leave that for now and stop rambling and get into this conversation with Gloria after a super quick word from our sponsor.
Hello, I'm Bryce, Account Manager and Sales Solutions Supervisor at Amico Brett, providing you with the best customer service in ceramics. This episode is brought to you by Amico Brett. Find Amico glazes and equipment at your local distributor. Welcome to Clay, and thank you for listening.
Now, on with the show. Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the show where we talk all about what it's really like to build a living from the things you make. I'm your host, seasoned entrepreneur of 13 years, Rebecca Ikes-Cara. Hey, Gloria, welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Rebecca. Thanks for having me again. Hello.
This is always such the awkward transition because I wish we were already recording when we were talking about you teaching your students and the existential dread of centering, because I feel like that would have led us into a whole lot of conversation.
Yeah. So many stories.
Well, before we get into it, how would you introduce yourself for people listening to a pottery making podcast?
Yeah. Hi, my name's Gloria Han. I make pots for good ancestors. I use traditional Korean pottery as a case study to see how traditions are adapted, created, and abandoned by diasporic peoples. Making pots for good ancestors is a way of considering what it means to receive so generously and give freely. It's a way of considering the kinds of things that I want to leave and how I can intentionally spend my time on this side of Earth.
Oh, I can't have a follow-up question to that because there's so much there to unpack. And I think what's also really refreshing, what I hear in that also is connecting teachers to current, like our generation has a way with the internet and promoting things and Instagram, and there's slowly becoming a recognition, I think, of, there's people who are masters at this craft who aren't getting Instagram recognition and Instagram famous of like, oh my gosh, it's so incredible. And I know we've talked a lot about, naming the people that you have learned from and all of that. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I didn't have it. That's not a question. No. That was just an observation. So tackling that big subject, where in the world are you? And is it mostly making I mean, I know a little bit of the answer, but just to give everybody a little clarity.
I am in a suburb of Metro Vancouver, BC, which is, when I was in Chicago, I would say that's like the Evanston of Chicago, called Coquitlam. It's like a 30 to 40 minute drive out from Vancouver. A bunch of your listeners aren't even going to know where Vancouver is. Anyway, I'm in the lower mainland of British Columbia in a city called Coquitlam. I live and work on the unceded traditional lands of the Musqueam peoples and the Coquitlam peoples. What was the second part of that question?
Most of your time, I know, teaching and making, right? You're teaching at the university level?
Yes. So I'm teaching at a college called Langara College. I did teach one semester of wheel throwing at Emily Carr. That was pretty great. But currently I'm covering a leave for, I think, at least another semester after this one. It's really great because it's a 2-year diploma program with it's first and second years in a 2-year diploma program. The students go and take intro courses in a really well-rounded curriculum. And so you're kind of forced to try everything. And I hear all the time from students, like, I never thought I would like sculpture because I've only ever done painting. Or like, I never thought I would like ceramics, or I thought I would like ceramics, but I absolutely hated the texture of clay. Those guys are slab builders. 100%.
Or I've heard somebody say, like, I hate the feeling of slip. And I'm like, how are you wheel throwing? Like, what you have to use water.
Yeah, those guys are very clean wheel throwers. Or they just stare at me in existential crisis. It's fine. I understand. I really like the program because the student body is really diverse, and a lot of folks are actually trying art for the first time, even if they have never tried it. Usually they've tried it before, but like have not taken a high school art class or even extracurricular programs. They just know that they really want to try it, or people who are taking a leap of faith and completely changing their careers around at like after 20 years of working. And that's also really it's rewarding for me, because teaching is, I would say, is a rewarding career, but it's just exciting to be a part of that journey for them. I love being their cheerleaders.
That's awesome. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I remember you saying teaching was always in air quotes, was kind of, you knew you wanted to do that ahead of time. It wasn't like I want to be an artist and therefore it feels like I have to teach because I don't know how else to make a living from it, right?
Yeah, can you hear that siren?
Yeah, a little bit, but whatever. You live in a city. It's normal. Life happens.
Let's not over-exaggerate the word city. Although it's getting more densely populated. It's funny because Jeff...
spoken like a true Chicagoan.
Oh my God. When I first moved to Chicago, I was like, it's so busy here. And my friend from New York was like, that's cute. And my mom, who went to school in Seoul, Korea, was like, that's cute. Because Seoul is more densely populated than New York. Yes, so I knew that I wanted to be a teacher before I knew that I wanted to be an artist. And I actually applied for teaching school, got in, but the residency program that I was doing didn't allow me to do both. It was a local residency program, so I feel like I could have made both work, but like the conditions of the program made me supervise certain things at certain hours, and the teaching program is a full-time teaching program, which I think is actually different than most places in the States, where like you don't need a full teaching certificate, because you get like you have your 4-year degree, which could be in education or literally anything else. And then if it's what's considered teachable, you go and do another like year. You get another bachelor's of education from that and a teaching certificate, which also other provinces in BC don't have, I don't think. Anyway, I am rambling. Yeah, so I got into the program. It's very competitive. Heartbreaking to say no to that, especially like early 20s. I don't know where I'm going. But my art was really exciting at that moment. Like I just graduated from Emily Carr, and the prospect of being an artist, I realized like, oh, I could actually do this, which is not a feeling that I actually even had while I was at Emily Carr. And then I got into my master's with a full tuition waiver. So it just worked out.
So we say yes. When that happens, we say yes.
Yeah, it was such an incredible experience. I am really thankful for my graduate school experience for sure. But I realized that like the kind of teaching that you do at a post-secondary level is what the kind of teaching that I wanted to do, because I could participate in, like, I don't know, future coworker making, future like fellow community member making. Not that I'm making them, but it's
Right.
it just feels meaningful to do that. And just, yeah, it's a very exciting time. But I really enjoy teaching in community centers, just all of it. Yeah.
The dog's about to lose his mind. I'm like, come on. I saw him get up and I was like, no, don't do it. Don't do it. You mentioned when you were in undergrad, not even fully realizing that like you could make this work. Was there something that, an experience or something that shifted that made you realize, oh, I could do this? And that's kind of what kept you continuing, or what kind of flipped that switch?
It's funny that I say that because no, I didn't realize that I could make it work, but I wasn't gonna do anything else. So I don't. So, was there a switch? I think I was even just avoiding the question. Yes, there was the panic of like, oh my God, how am I gonna make money? But like, I've always been employed. So I knew that I would have some sort of a job while I was still making work. So what was I? Honestly, I blocked so much of undergrad out, to the extent that like I had to ask my friends, like, what is it? What do you remember art school? I don't remember art school. Is this an insane amount of work? Is this a bananas amount of work? And they were like, who can do that? And I said, I did this last week. This entire and they were like, exactly.
That's amazing.
Anyway, yeah. What was I talking about?
I guess I'm asking because
Yeah.
I think it's interesting as an outsider looking at like the gallery work that you create. I don't understand how artists make it work who only produce work for galleries, right? Because I look at that and I'm like, okay, but you have to put all of the effort, all of the work is on the upfront, and then you create a show, you have an exhibit, maybe you're making work for a show that you already know you're going to be in, which is really great because at least you know it's going to go somewhere. And then you have to hope people buy stuff. And it's like, how do we make that work? How is that sustainable, aside from really savvy cash flow planning or something? I don't know, like that it's a natural. You do see a lot of gallery artists, I guess, teaching. And what I think is interesting about your story is you knew teaching was first, right? Yeah. And so there's a different passion there than kind of the people you hear coming out of grad school who are like, yeah, I guess I'm going to go teach. And I'm like, is that the...
Yeah. I think if you don't truly love teaching, don't go into teaching, because you're going to make yourself and someone else very miserable. Like, not necessarily, because some people don't know that they might be good at teaching and they try it out of necessity and they end up really liking it. Those aren't the cases that I'm talking about. It's like people I know who aren't really into teaching, but they're just doing it for the income. Totally fair situation, but you're gonna hate it. It's so much work. But yeah, now I see teaching as a very integrated part of my practice, and I don't actually think that it's separable at this point. I think I'll always do some sort of teaching or mentoring or something like that. It itches the right part of my brain. And as someone who's thinking about answers and intergenerational learning, it fits very well with another teaching practice in a way that like it doesn't, my mind's not, I don't have to do a total 180 when I go and work on my practice, and I can make while I'm with them as well. Like sometimes I'll come in during open studio and make things. I wonder if that just makes them anxious.
Might. I mean, if you're seeing the existential crisis in their eyes, maybe give them some open studio space by themselves.
Yeah, totally. Totally. But usually when I'm there, I'm like bombarded with questions. So like maybe it's probably a good thing that I'm there sometimes.
Right. That's really interesting though, because to think of it as an interconnected part of your practice, I imagine is really crucial, because, so many people talk about diversifying how we can support ourselves and all of this, but some of the times when that starts to happen, you get spread too thin. But what I'm hearing is when you have disparate things, well, not disparate, when they blend together, it actually supports even more so than just the pragmatic, salary twice a week kind of thing.
Totally. There was a period of time from July. Oh, when was it? That's unimportant. June to August, I wasn't teaching at all. And I had a wrist injury that I'm still recovering from mid-July. And so I wasn't teaching for a while after teaching so much while also maintaining a practice. And then during this time, I couldn't even make anything either because I was hurt. And I was still like posting on my Instagram stories like, hey, are there any Korean diaspora people who want to talk about this? Like, do you want to hang out? Do you want to talk about this stuff? Like, let me share this. And like, I was still trying to share and make connections and get people really excited and stuff like that, because that's what keeps me going.
That makes sense. I knew that was going to happen. Well, tell me a little bit too about like how did you get into clay, and how we're talking about the style of your work and kind of how that trajectory has been with what you're making now. I know you just finished this amazing show.
Yeah. Honestly, it really did start with like, oh, the mud squish is nice. Yeah, as a kid, starting kindergarten, I didn't speak any English, and so our kindergarten room had a make and take table. This is starting really early, and so I could just sit there and not talk to anybody and make stuff and take stuff home, because it was called the make and take table. It's funny because I truly thought that I understood English. My mom told me like she didn't know that I didn't know English, because I was like, oh, I understand everything. I had no idea what was going on at any point. I just follow people. That's sort of how I've done everything.
I may or may not be that way with Italian.
yeah. Like, oh, obviously, I had no idea what was happening. But our city had a bunch of subsidized programs, so my mom took me to some like parent and taught classes, and we would squish the clay around. And she was always really supportive of that and try to get that in as whenever possible. Our art classes in school usually had like some sort of clay in some of the years back when art classes were still a thing in schools.
That's a whole we could dive down that rabbit hole for the rest of the time, or we could
God, it's just okay. I'm gonna tangent, and you can cut this out if you want, but it is
fine.
It is classist to take away art class, because art classes are freaking expensive. I was fortunate enough that we had subsidized programs, and like we were in like a weird financial situation where sometimes that could happen. I was also lucky that Treehouse TV, it's like our. Did you guys have Treehouse?
I feel like it's in the group of Sesame Street and
kind of. Yeah. Did you guys have Crazy Quilt, or is that a Canadian thing?
That might just be a Canadian thing.
It feels Canadian. She would just Crazy Quilt was this craft show with a puppet raccoon. And they would make crafts out of household supplies, and I was like, yes, this is the better use of all of my mother's sponges. So like, my mom told me that stuff would just go missing. She would have to check like the corners of the house, and they would have like markers stuck in. Anyway,
that's amazing.
I'm really going. Yes, cutting out art classes is classist, because some kids are not going to be into sports. Some kids aren't going to be into drama. Not that sports are cheap either. Some kids, like, that is what they want to do. And, like, unfortunately, there's so much elitism in art school. And if art is the way that a person wants to pursue a post-secondary school education, which is, like, the number one way to boost, like, to move classes, economic classes, then that should be an option. But, like, that's not... Also, trades aren't pushed. Okay, I'm like really going off.
I can join you.
My partner's a teacher, and like it's a whole thing. We both decide to be teachers. We come home and we don't say a word to each other. I come in. He's done at 3. I'm done at like 6:30ish, and I come home at 7:30, sometimes like 10 p.m. And I just go, oh, the ADHD is so bad right now.
You're totally fine. We were just talking about the trajectory of clay and how you got into it, and you're fine.
My students deal with this too, and a bunch of them have ADHD. They're like, and I think they love it, but they like also understand the trajectory of clay. So in high school, high school is when you are pressured to like figure out what you want to do for the rest of your life, and
which is absurd. Also, just small tangent. Who knows that at 16? I'm fascinated by the fact that to me you're like a unicorn in that you touched clay as a kid and then you stuck with it, whereas the rest of us are all like, well, that can't possibly be a career. I'm gonna go do something else, and then 20 years later are like, why did I give that up?
Yeah, which is why like I genuinely enjoyed teaching community center classes, despite like how grueling it was sometimes. And the program that I have at Langara, a lot of people stop their careers after 20 years and decide to come back. And that's so exciting to me. Clay is a euphemism for how early I started. I just really like squishing dirt. But yeah, so I started high school. I knew that I loved art. So I took an art class in grade 9. And part of that program, there was a clay unit. And we had a couple of ceramic projects. And I knew that I really, really liked that. I've always liked working in 3D. Then I actually didn't take any art classes until the summer between 11th and 12th grade. I think I took an extracurricular course in grade 11, but I was living a lie until then. My mom gave me an ultimatum because I was kind of a mess and was like, pick anything. Just pick anything. So yeah, I picked art. So the key is to have your parents give up on you a little bit. It is not my fault. She raised me not to respect authority. And she thought it wouldn't bite her in the butt. And
comes back to catch
a couple years ago, and she was like, yeah, I know. I did that on purpose, but I did that to myself. Anyway, it wasn't like I always knew I want to go to art school situation. It was a, oh God, I don't like anything else, and I had to figure something out situation. And so my mom was like, okay, if you're really going to do this, we're going to do this. And I hustled and put my portfolio together. And I still think putting my portfolio together for my undergrad was harder than any of the applications that I've done since then. Nobody tells you how to put together a portfolio. Even if you, like, I was lucky because my high school, it had really good arts programs. And even now, students in the area, when they ask, like, oh, which high school should I go to? If they are thinking of doing cross-catchment, I say, if you're going to go to do art, like, this is a surefire, like, this is a guaranteed good program. It doesn't mean that you're going to get into art school, but, like, the school really encourages art. And I was really lucky to have that. Shout out to Miss Stokes and Mr. McKelgan. I'm sorry I made your lives miserable sometimes. Yeah, there's a linear story in there somewhere.
I think it's fascinating, though, because when given an ultimatum, my default, and I think a lot of people's default, is to, like, take a quote-unquote safe track, right? Mm-hmm. Like, the track we're shown as kids in terms of teacher, firefighter, policeman, whatever. I'm using massive stereotypes. But really, like, when you have career day at school, parents come in and talk about what they do, you don't get a big, vast array of examples.
No.
And so I'm fascinated by the fact that the ultimatum led to art school as opposed to, I don't know, accounting.
Well, I didn't have a lot of choices because my grades weren't that great. And, okay, that's not true. I was like A's and B's, but, like, I didn't have the top marks in the subjects that would qualify me for things, and I closed a lot of doors for myself because I was really scared of being smart. Also, I had ADHD, undiagnosed. So my mom said pick something. So I was like, fine, if you're gonna make me pick something, I'm gonna do something that I actually want to do, and you're not gonna like. So I chose art, but the thing is, like, my art program really made it feel like it was possible. And it didn't matter that I didn't know now. If I wanted it to be possible, I had options. And that was something that I had never really considered. The way that I chose things was generally like, well, we didn't have money for this and we didn't have money for this, so I'm going to do this instead. Or like, I really want to do this. How are we going to come up with the money to do this? Like, it wasn't like, oh, well, would you like to do this or this? And like, the options were not there. If I wanted something to be the option, we made it be an option. And that's what our art program did for me. They presented options, and I think that's all a lot of people need, like the support, and not like, this is exactly how you do this, but like, if you can't do this right away, this is another option that you can go to, and here's like a roundabout way to get there. Like, it's just showing the many possibilities to get there, and how like to getting there is a possibility is super important, which I think is like a really frustrating part of my curriculum for a lot of students, because I don't tell them how to get there. I ask them what they want, and then I'm like, okay, here's the 17-step plan to get there, but we're gonna start at step 1. And if they decide that they're not willing to do that work, then they can, like, you know, negotiate with themselves and decide like what they're actually willing to do. Or some of them come in with really big ideas, and I say, yes, let's do that. This is what it takes. And they're like, no. And then we can maybe achieve up to step 3 out of 50. Yeah.
That is such an important point. That is such a huge point, because it's interesting to me, and part of why I started this podcast is that very concept in terms of, you know, the internet has allowed us to see so many other options in a really, really great way. But at the same time, I still think we can get stuck in such echo chambers of like, well, the way to be a potter is to become an Instagram influencer and have tens of thousands of followers and do a shop update and sell out. And that's how it works. And it's like, if that's not your cup of tea, if that's not, you know, the actual part of making the work that you're interested in, then it still feels like there's only so many routes, when really there's maybe not endless possibilities, but so many other ways to get there.
Yes. I started out doing art as a way to cope with being in school and not knowing what's happening around me because I didn't speak English or understand English, even though I lied about it to my mom about knowing how to do that, knowing how to speak English. And then I was lucky enough to be in schools that had art programs. And when I got to high school, I had to figure out what I wanted to do. And I only ever took art class in grade 9. And then in between grade 11 and 12, I had to decide what to do because my mom was like, oh my gosh, pick something. And my grades just weren't there to go anything into like STEM or like those traditional things, those like traditionally accepted ways of making money. And then my mom was like, okay, if you're going to do this, we're really going to do this. And my high school had a really supportive art program that like showed me that being an artist was possible, even if you're not going to go and be like a studio artist showing in shows and selling a lot of work. Like there's other things that you can do with an art degree. And I was really lucky that I also liked teaching because that was always an option for me. My high school just made it feel really possible to have some art career, even if I was unsure what that would look like. And that if I really wanted to do this, I could go and do this. And then I got into Emily Carr, even though my own art teachers sometimes were like, I don't know what this. Fine. Yeah, it's great.
It worked.
It worked. And then I went to Emily Carr thinking that, like, knowing that I really, really liked ceramics. But I got scared once I got to Emily Carr, which is, I think I was just kind of like, oh, this is really real now. And then you could go straight into the design program without an application if your GPA was high enough. And like, surprise, surprise, when I'm doing stuff that like actually stimulates my brain and I enjoy, I was suddenly getting better grades. And so I had a good enough GPA to get in. But I really hated the design department. And I was scared that I would. The department is lovely. It was not how my brain worked. And so I kept my options open by like taking art history, like other art major prereqs. And then I switched out into the ceramics class. And I actually did mostly prints making in undergrad. In third year of my undergrad, I did an exchange semester at SAC where I also did my master's. And all the things that I felt like weren't art were suddenly validated as art, and all the things that I wanted to make art about were suddenly considered as important and encouraged. And that, I think, was the point where I was like, I have something to freaking say. This is possible. I didn't know that I was going to go for a master's. Honestly, I don't even really think that I knew what an MFA was, but that didn't matter because that was the switch. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a potter, but like the thing with being a ceramics major is that it feels like, of all the, I think, media, it at least feels like you could reach a wider audience because people have a better access point on like how they would include this in their lives, which is different than the access point that like something like painting has, where people can immediately recognize it as capital A art. Yeah.
Which is interesting, right? Because it's potentially an easier access point to say, start selling something.
Yes.
But then as your work, as you advance through the craft, as you have more skills, as you want to make more of a living from it and realize how much you have to charge for it to do it, then you have this like backlash effect of like, oh, now it has to be capital A art in order to sell at a certain rate in order to pay my rent.
Yes. For the same reasons I didn't like design, I realized I don't actually like making functional pottery that much. I really appreciate a well-made mug, a well-made bowl. And sometimes I'll make something, I'm like, yes, this is the bowl. Like, this is the form that I was looking for. But those are rare moments. Yeah, I just talked about how ceramics was an easy sell for me because it's easy to figure out how to sell it. But no, you're right. Like, trying to actually making a living off of it, it's no longer at an accessible price point. That being said, I don't require that from my work. Yeah, I'm really interested in production pottery. I'm so bad at it. I'm really lucky I like teaching.
Well, I mean, that's the interesting thing, right? And I guess I don't have the solution for the person who wants to make capital A art in galleries, explore a theme, explore a concept, deep dive down the research that you were talking about that you teach, and not have something else like teaching or another job or partner, spousal support or whatever it is to be able to get you off the ground, right?
Yeah, I actually think that being a ceramics artist makes it just a little bit trickier because I don't see it in galleries that often. I think it would be easier, not easier, but it would be a more obvious, a clearer way to sell something as art if you were doing, say, painting or sculpture or something like that. And like Canada has an artist fee payment schedule. Also, it's called the Canadian Artist Representation, I think, or CARFAC. The FAC is French. I don't speak French. And they tell you like how much you should be paid according to how big the institution is and how many people are in the show. So like there's sort of a structure set up to make sure that you get compensated. That doesn't mean exploitation doesn't still happen, but it's at least there. And we also have the Canada Council for Arts and other provincial arts funders that you could go to with like grant applications and stuff like that. So like there are those routes, and then you can also go to commercial galleries, that sort of a thing. But earlier you were talking about how like, yeah, artists come out of grad school and they're like, oh, I guess I'll teach then. I wonder if it would just be better to get a non-arts related job that gives you enough to allow you to make until your art practice sustains you for a little bit longer, a little bit more dependably, because then you're not running all of your emotional energy out by the time you get to your studio, unless you choose another equally as exhausting field. But yeah, I don't know. I do appreciate the not having the pressure to completely make a living off my work, because then I can focus on the research, and then being in an institution can sometimes support that as well. Like if I need to do like some glaze experimentation and research with that, I can do that. Also, if I'm interested in something, I can just be like, hey guys, you want to see this? And I can show them that, and they'll do a bunch of experiments, and it's really nice. It's really efficient, and they make a lot of mistakes that I would have never even gotten to, because that's not the kind of work that I like to make. But it's high quality mistake making, and then it's really efficient mistake making where we all discover each other's accidents, and it's such good learning to be in a community.
Students as studio assistants.
Yes. Of course.
That's amazing. I want to touch a little bit more because I am personally fascinated, and I think more countries, i.e. the United States, need to, the fact that you guys have and correct me if I'm wrong, but basically an organized body, an organization that has dictated like bare minimum value that artists should be paid, I think is flippin' brilliant. You know, because there's actors guilds in the US, and these are city specific. There's probably also national. I don't know more about them other than like Chicago actors that I know, that like there's unions for actors that then help with that. But that's the only arts field I know that has any kind of organized structure that helps. For one, helps as an artist in the first place to know what the hell should I charge. And for two, and like you said, exploitation still happens, but at least begins some of the guardrails to help protect people and the value of their time and their intellectual property of having learned all of this craft.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely couldn't make a living off of just showing my work unless I did a show every single month at an institution that pays CARFAC fees, because not everyone does. But it's at least something that recognizes the value of your labor. And when I get asked to do things, I can say, oh, do you pay CARFAC fees? And then kind of take it from there. Without that, I'm sort of left to negotiate everything on my own. And there's no it's hard to determine an industry standard, especially for artists who are just starting out.
And especially if you don't have colleagues to have that conversation with, right? Yeah. Like if you're in a community of people, you can say, oh, I got asked to do this. I'm excited about it, but how should I negotiate? What should I, guess what? You can negotiate. It doesn't, it doesn't have to be just take whatever scraps they're willing to give you and be grateful for the exposure.
Exactly.
Right? Well, and part of that was also, is that like did you mention before like a union on top of that that's separate, or that's something I'm conflating things totally?
I think CARFAC might be the union that I'm talking about. You can join CARFAC as like a member. I think they give you like legal resources and other things like that. I think that was it.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. Well, so since you mentioned like the only way to survive off of just your art would be having shows once a month in a gallery of that caliber. And when I think about that, like from a production standpoint, okay, fine. But from an exploring concepts and researching, it's just not sustainable for someone to be able to. I don't have a good formulated question, but I guess where my brain is going is like the curiosity of how does someone have the support to be able to research and think about a subject and hone a craft, because as we all know, this takes years to get good at, let alone mastery. And being able to like give yourself the time and space to do that within the reality of supporting yourself and as an adult is like oil and water in some ways.
Totally. I mean, so the CARFAC fee is not meant to like sustain anyone anyway. It's just in recognition of your labor and recognition of the fact that you should be compensated when you show in a gallery. That aside, that you can, so there's a kind of grant that you can get called the Research and Creation Grant. So like that's one of the options. But I mean, yeah, like you're going to have to sell your work and figure something out. I'm not sure how to address this. Well, there's so much like creative research, I think, that comes out of just being with the material and making and the discoveries that you make in the process. And I think that's why like having some research skills and some self-awareness is really important, because then like you can reflect back on the things that you're making, and that is the time that you would do research. Like the research is just like when you're in the studio.
I think it's a really helpful insight for people to consider, like as they're starting their careers, thinking about what you mentioned before in terms of like you're graduating from grad school and the default being teaching because that's what everybody talks about. But like the mental capacity required to do that is so heavy, is so big that, you know, making coffee at Starbucks might pay the same if you're an adjunct, frankly, and not require thought, so that you still have mental energy afterwards to go and put in the studio. Like I feel like I see there being two routes. You either try to find a job that is tangential to the art so that you're still involved, even if you're not making your work specifically, or you do something that's just like totally unconnected, does not require much mental effort, so that you have energy left over.
It's so funny that you say that, because I absolutely would be worse at making coffee at Starbucks. I think working at Starbucks would require so much. I could not do it. I am always so nice to the baristas.
I've done it. it. The nice part is if you work a morning shift, I wasn't Starbucks specifically, I was at Argo Tea in Chicago, which you probably know in Chicago. If you work a morning shift, you have to be there so early that by the time you work an 8-hour shift, it's like 11 o'clock in the morning. And so you can go and do something else and nobody knows that you had another job because you're available during the normal hours.
Oh my gosh. I'm not a morning person either. I'm very lucky that the stars aligned. Yeah. I mean, I was working, I think I told you in the first part of this that I was working 3 separate community teaching jobs. At one point, I was teching while at the same time teaching 11 classes a week, which is not sustainable by any means. Though I think I have a similar number of students now, because community center classes are smaller. Anyway, you make it work.
Yep.
You decide what you like doing and what you're willing to do. And yeah, you make it work. While I was doing that, I was still like working with my mentor and studying traditional Korean pottery. You have to decide what your non-negotiables are, basically.
It's funny that you use that word exactly, because when I was talking to Mike Traveris as he was starting his apprenticeship, he was like, I decided a non-negotiable, and my non-negotiable was I have to touch clay. Like I need to be working with clay.
I listened to that episode. Yeah.
You use the exact same word where I'm like, this is like, yep, Totally. I am aware that in the future, I feel like when we have conversations, I should just be like, do you have 2 hours? Because we're going to talk.
I do have 2 hours.
Okay. Well, I don't want to I have already used so much of your time, so I don't want to overstep, but I do want, what about kind of your practice and how you're making this all work now? This is just an open-ended question because I feel like I want you to take it in whatever direction you want to in terms of what your practice looks like now and how it all works together, more or less, if it works.
So I just finished my show with Gloria Han at the Art Gallery at Evergreen. And so I'm kind of just chilling out a little bit. I did some grant applications that I didn't get, but there's more grant applications. It's fine. And I think it's just the universe telling me to sit my butt down and just take a breather. And that's okay. I was going really fast for a really long time, even during the pandemic. Somehow I find a way to be really busy without making any money. Is what I was during the pandemic. But what does my practice look like now? Honestly, it's a lot of admin work. It's a lot of admin work, and I'm teaching, and so I'm still touching clay, and I'm still thinking of experiments, and I have 17 different, realistically I have 8 emotional support notebooks that are all separated by subject matter, and one of them is a separate art practice journal where I don't, it's not my sketchbook, it's not my planner, it's where I talk about the inner thoughts of so personal now, the inner thoughts of the emotional process of having art practice and just the daily mundaneness of having an art practice. I'm not in my personal studio as often, but I am still seeing my mentor, Master Kim, and we're working on a double walled vessel right now. So I did one for practice that I did post on Instagram, and I'll probably make 10 more. Maybe one of them will survive. I don't know. What else am I doing? I wouldn't say that I'm actively making something toward. Oh, wait. I am. I got asked to submit to a bread-themed show, which I apparently inspired 6 years ago in grad school.
Now I have questions.
Yeah. I forget about that moment in my practice. And it keeps coming back. Yeah, I'm doing some experimenting right now. I should really fire things soon. So most of the things I make don't get fired. Even if I make it all the way to carving and inlay, I'll be trash, and I'll just trash it. It's fine.
I actually think that's a really great point. I want to underscore what you just said, that most of the things you make don't make it to a completion, because I feel like maybe this is just American culture. I don't know. Especially when we're first learning, there's this desire or this expectation that we're going to finish everything. And then people wind up with a lot of pots and they take up physical space. And so then people go on Etsy and start selling them because they're taking up physical space. Which, look, when I started a community studio and I was in an apartment in Chicago, I did this 100% because I didn't have that much room to store things. But I was selling stuff that I really probably should have never sold ever. It should have. I'm starting to think a lot about changing that expectation for ourselves, and that there is so much value in you having made those 10 pots, period, whether or not all 10 of them see the light of day with glaze under the light on a pedestal in a gallery, because the one you did finish is probably exponentially different.
Listen, we all do it. Part of it, okay, as an instructor, I make people fire a lot of stuff that I wouldn't have, but that's an important part of learning, especially when you only have a 6 to 12 week program. That being said, because I'm not making to sell, because that's the other thing, having to find some sort of financial end to things, to this practice, I make something maybe not to completion, but almost to completion, at least bi-weekly to monthly. And every time and for each of those things, there's a few failed experiments per week, because I spend about half my week in the studio, but you would never know it. Maybe it is American culture or Western culture. I don't know. I think part of it is that, we're limited in the time that we have and we want something to show for it. And we are often in short programs. But then after you get through your first, like, you made some things that you think are kind of nice for the stage that you're at, and you glaze it and you fire it, and eventually you get really excited. So you make a lot of stuff and you glaze it and you fire it. I think we should really start being more selective. When I look at my peers who do sell for a living, they spend a lot of time developing their product and they sell it. But like, as they sell their work and as they're making the stuff that they know that sells, they're still experimenting and trying other things. And yes, it's to develop new product, but it's also to like feed their artistic practice. I don't do production pottery because I would rather spend a lot of time on one thing, and thinking about the like cost versus labor versus time equation is really hindering to my creative practice. And it's just not something that motivates me very much.
Do you feel like part of the appreciation, I guess, or the perspective of understanding that you're going to make a number of pieces and not worry about firing them or not worry about completing them, and the learning process has a little bit of that grown out of your teachers or working with a mentor now, or was that kind of always there?
That was always there. That doesn't mean I didn't fire my share of like really awful work, but like every time that I fire something, it was either because there was a due date or it was something that at that time felt really important to me to fire.
Right, because obviously all of us are always improving.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're waiting to fire something until perfection, that's not what I'm...
Oh, totally. This is I think this might be a cultural thing. So when I first started with my teacher, I think I fired 3 things in the first year. No, 1 thing in the first year. Yeah. And then I fired fewer than 20 things for the first 5 years, which is unheard of. But I went to see him almost every week, except when I was in grad school. And when I was in grad school, I came home for the summer and winter breaks, and I still worked with him. And when I got back from grad school, I worked with him at least once or twice a week for as many weeks as I could while still working. And yeah, there were so many things that I made and just broke and made and sliced in half. And like, my time on the wheel is not necessarily to get something off of it. It's to work through the formation of a new idea that I'm working on. It's also because I'm working in like a traditional media. There's a really long ceramic history in Korea, and so there are ways of doing things that like people love to tell me that there is no right or wrong way of doing things, and that's true, but there's a reason why so many of these techniques have endured, and I think it's really important to learn the rules before you choose to break them. I could not be so arrogant to say that like I can think of something better.
In like hundreds of years of practice.
When these techniques have like sustained civilizations for thousands of years. That's not to say that I'm not going to innovate on these traditions, but I at least want the option to not reinvent the wheel, honestly. So I would be learning a technique and my teacher would come and say like, that's bad. We're going to cut all these in half. And I'll be like, okay, cool. Tell me what I did wrong. And you just have to have that humility. You have to let other people have an authority on something. It's like when people say that art is subjective, and it is subjective, but like, I don't know. God.
But there's also bad art.
There's also bad art, but there's always something that you could be doing better. And like, why are you taking a class if you're not going to try and improve is my thought. And also like people just try to sell way too early. Way too early. I think it's really excited. Like people get really excited and they want to get their work out there. And I get that. But especially when ceramics is just so permanent after you fire it, I think you owe it to the material to let it live through a better object. Yeah, I'm kind of pussyfooting around this because like I have my own baggage being told like, oh, Asian teaching is so authoritarian and it's like stifling your creativity and all these things. I'm like, yeah, maybe that's true, but to some extent, but it's up to you to then take these skills and apply it. But like, I think when my teacher tells me that I'm doing something wrong and he like sticks with me till I do it right, it's him showing me like so much care because he's letting me make my own mistakes, but as someone who knows better and as someone who really wants to pass these teachings on to me, like he uses so much emotional energy to make sure that I get it right, or at least that I know what is considered right. so that I have the option to follow it or not. And I just don't know if there's a culture of that here, wherever here is for you, like at least in the West. Like that's not to say that I don't give my students honest feedback, but I think it would be very jarring, and understandably so, for me to say, like, this object that you spent 3 weeks on is not worth firing. I need to start again. But like, if you want to get better, it's really the only way to do it.
Yeah, it's like you have to have that space created. There has to be safety in that space to begin with, to be told that. Whereas if the space created by an institution or whatever doesn't allow for that, then saying that to someone is going to be lifelong damage or something. Yeah. Maybe I'm okay with the idea, because like back when I was a musician, I was an oboist, and to make your own reeds, you're like literally whittling away on this tiny little bit of wood. And I could spend 3 hours working on a reed and then it would crack. And you can't use a cracked reed. And so it's like I could spend hours on something and then it would just crack. And it was like, well, there goes all that time.
Well, like, I don't understand. This is the thing that I don't even think I could defend or see the other. Just don't. It's called a practice. I think any profession, especially one that requires like a very specific skill, is going to take countless hours of invisible time and labor and mistakes and blood, sweat, and tears. So why would ceramics be any different? And I don't think people are unaware of that. I think the amount of time is underestimated. Yeah, I don't know. We talked a lot about this in the previous session, where people go to Asian countries and they go and learn. Like, okay, this is the thing that I'm kind of pussyfooting around. People go to Asian countries to learn these things, and they come back and they're like, oh, all they did was make me sweep the floor, like, all. And I'm like, okay, so right. Okay, like, did you go to be an integrated part of the studio culture and actually help them? Like, were you actually there to help them as an apprentice, or were you there to like learn the skill and leave?
In 2 weeks, by the way.
In 2 weeks, like, or were you there and like seeing this as like a transactional thing where they're a service, you know? Yeah. And I was lucky that I didn't have to do it. But yeah, my teacher tells me about how like that's how a lot of people start, and like people are so busy surviving that it would be hard to even find a teacher right now unless that's like part of their business model. And again, I've been with him for 6 years and I still don't have everything. Not even close. Yeah, I'm pussyfooting around like that stereotype of like, oh, Asian teaching culture is so oppressive and like it stifles your creativity, and you're gonna go and they're gonna like treat you like a servant and all these things, and then they make you learn how to make a tea bowl over and over and over again. They'll come and smash everything. Like, yes, that's literally what it takes. Like, you can't, like, you're really gonna revere this tradition and then like not do what it takes.
Right. Yeah. Well, right. Then we wonder why. Then we look at someone. I'm going to just pick the most obvious and stereotype, and I've never heard the name audibly out loud, so if I mess it up, someone correct me. But we look at an account like Mundo Bang, right? And are like, oh my gosh, I could never dream of being that good. How does he do that? And it's like, well, he does it because he's cut a lot of pots and because you have to decide which way you want it, right? Either if you want to have that caliber of skill, are you okay with someone saying, hey, guess what? These aren't good. Cut them in half and do it again. Or don't cut them in half and be okay with kind of, the increase of your skills being slower or being different, or I don't know. Obviously, there's no absolutes. So could you get better without cutting everything in half? I guess so, but it is a very fast way to learn.
It's so much more efficient to spend 2 months of just grinding and learning how to do it and not firing anything and then making what you want to make than to like save every precious little thing. Also, Wundobang is like also an exception because I've heard stories about him from when he was in school and he was like exceptionally hardworking, but that's what it takes.
Right. I want to ask you, because I know we've referenced you having a mentor and working with him for 6 years, and I know people are going to ask, like, how does that work? And also the less nuanced question, how do you get one, quote unquote? Like there's a lot of problems with that grammar. I think it's an incredibly valuable relationship, but it's also not, you can't like go to Craigslist and be like, ceramics maker, or like find a mentor. Like it doesn't necessarily work that way.
I mean, it might, but I actually, it's so fun. I was thinking about this last night, like the timing of the canceled appointments for this would have been so soon after I had just finished talking about my work. So it would have been really fresh. And now I'm like, oh, I don't remember how to talk about anything. I don't remember my practice. Do I make anything? I don't know. Because I've been so focused on teaching. Because like, this is a tangent, but like teaching is also like such a creative act for me. It's so much fun to figure out different ways to make things accessible and adapt things and more relevant and teach in the way that like I think is important and really highlight the unique perspective that I have as a Korean diasporic maker who is participating in traditional arts. Mentorship. I say that because this question came up when I did an artist talk at the college I'm teaching at. The relation, I think, okay, this is a very idealized summary of Korean culture, but I was very fortunate to be raised by a mother who emphasized this a lot. But when you know better, you have the responsibility to do better, and you're held to a higher standard of accountability. And so in Korean, there is an age hierarchy that it can be quite problematic. But I think the idea of that, or at least the way that I want to interpret the idea of that, and the way that we use honorifics for people who are older than us or hold a higher position than us, is to, one, respect the experience and place in society that they have. But we call them by that honorific because they're also expected to care for those who are like not below them, but below them. And so
Younger.
To use a very personal, like my sister has never called me Gloria. She calls me 언니, which is the word for older sister or like someone within the same generation of you who is older than you if you're a woman. There's a few words that are less gendered that you could also use, but my sister calls me 언니, which means older sister to a younger sister. And we always found that like embarrassing or like weird or annoying because like nobody here does that. But my dad was really intense about like, you need to, like, why aren't you following this? But in that talk of like, you need to respect your older sister, there was an even longer talk for me that was like a whole, like, you're the older sister, you need to know better, you have to take care of her, like you need to be accountable. And this is such a rambling way of saying this. Yeah, there was an even longer talk for me just to explain, to really drive home that I had responsibilities as an 언니, and there are certain like implications that come with it. That, for the same reason why you're not supposed to call your mom by her first name. There's responsibilities that come with the title of being a mother. I don't even know if this is really answering your question. Oh, right. There is not a culture of accountability in the West in the same way that I experienced in my mother's version of a Korean household, where like you are expected to care for those who are younger than you or those who seek your mentorship.
So did that make mentorship in a traditional practice kind of expected from a maker then? Like if you became a maker, became a potter, you expected that after a certain amount of time, people would be coming to you for mentorship? So it was like the door was kind of already open?
I don't know that it was expected, but if you think about how a tradition has survived thousands of years, like that didn't happen because people guarded their trade secrets with only themselves. Maybe they hired apprentices and maybe they hired workers, and that's how people continued that on and secrets were traded and stuff like that. But like, I would imagine so that it's expected. I, as someone who's thinking about ancestorship, feel that it's expected of me to pass that on. And like, that's one of the reasons why my teacher, I think, really believed in what I wanted to do, because his mission is to pass this on. And my mission is to, receive what he's wanting to tell me, but also to pass it on. Here's what I'll say. There's not enough intergenerational accountability and relationship building, or at least there isn't as much as I experienced in, my mother's version of a Korean household. That being said, it's not like if you're learning ceramics, like you already have a mentorship relationship with somebody, depending on the culture of like whatever studio you're at. Like at least at the college that I'm at, like any of my students could reach out to me after. Like that door isn't closed, essentially. But the difference between what I'm experiencing and what I think people are experiencing in the West is that like that continued accountability to each other, I think isn't there. I'm having a hard time to explain it because it feels a little like almost untranslatable. Okay. I want to emphasize that like mentorship, the potential for mentorship relationships already exist. But like the obviousness is not quite there. That's not to say that like everyone in Korea that's older or in that sort of position is going to like accept an apprentice or anything like that. But there's this, for a lot of people, maybe less so because things are changing, but there's a certain implied expectation, I think, of someone who knows better. Oh, I don't know if that even really makes sense. How to find a mentor. Okay, that rambling gives background to you. It lays the groundwork for what I'm about to say, which is I don't think you can really, like, you can approach people and be like, hey, are you looking for a mentee? Like, I would love that. But you have to foster these relationships yourselves. And I don't know. I think one way to do it is to go to someone you already know and admire and respect and get to know them a little bit more. And I think as a mentee or a potential mentee, you have to decide if like this is the kind of person who can give you the guidance that you need. And then, yeah, you can just ask them if they're interested in being your mentor. But I think that comes after you've already established some sort of relationship. But then like some artists are sort of later in their career and itching for some sort of like teaching opportunity that's not in a classroom, and they want to have like a more meaningful one-on-one mentorship relationship. And I don't know, I found that more and more people are posting about it as well. But yeah, you really need to foster that relationship first. You can't just be like, oh, I'm going to graduate and then go have a mentorship. That's not how that happens. It's like a mutual relationship of trust that this mentor is going to hold themselves accountable to a certain amount of responsibility of your development, and that you are going to do the kind of self-directed learning that it's going to take. It's a lot of trust.
I love that you mentioned you have to have already fostered that relationship, because I guess that's been my concern twofold. On the one hand, there's more opportunities because of the internet to connect with people in disparate geographic locations that you wouldn't otherwise get to learn from, right?
Right.
But then on the flip side, you have this weird kind of transactional thing happening where people who are new to clay are like, okay, teach me, I want this. Like, it's in the worst scenario, a mentee can come along and gain a whole bunch of stuff without it being a reciprocal relationship for the mentor.
Exactly. So, okay, that's the piece of that you summed it up so nicely. That's why I mentioned that the piece of background information about like Korean honorifics and that hierarchy, because the respect is reciprocal. I think the students that have the hardest time when learning from Master Kim are the ones that come in, they learn a few things. They're like, okay, now I want you to teach me this. Now show me how to do this. Now I want you to teach me this. Like, I let him lead, and then I'll learn the rules. And then when I have questions, I ask. But I'm not the one determining that. And different people are going to be comfortable with different things. At least for myself, for my more advanced students, at a certain point, I'm like, okay, you're doing self-directed projects. Like, tell me what demos you need, and I'll figure out how to do them. Or like, let me be your co-researcher and figure this out. But in order for, at least like for the kind of mentorship that I'm in, yeah, like I don't tell him what to teach me. I'll say that I'm curious about something, and then he can tell me if he thinks my skills are there or not. And maybe some steps have to be taken first. But I think especially now teaching is seen as such a like transactional relationship where it's like, I pay the tuition and you show me the things. And that's just not the case. And I think that's also why that's one of the limitations of like a Western learning culture, if that's what you could call it, at least in like an art school setting, I think, because like there's this idea that art is subjective, and it is, and it should be self-led, and you should be going for everything. But there are certain things that you just need to know, and you need to trust your instructors. Otherwise, you're just not going to get anything out of it. And in exchange, again, like it goes both ways. Like this mentor or person in a teaching capacity needs to hold themselves to a really high level of accountability in order to receive that trust.
Yeah. It opens up the conversation, which is a whole nother rabbit hole of also like the weird thing about the internet, and maybe this is specific to social media, is like there are a lot of people who are teaching to a certain extent, kind of quote unquote for free, like free content on YouTube and things like that, that then it creates the level of expectation that everybody will do that. And that's not necessarily true. And there has to be like, just comes back to understanding that it's a human relationship and it like goes back and forth. And I feel like when so much learning is virtual, like you forget if you send a DM to someone to be like, hey, will you be my mentor or something like that? It's a human on the other side. You're not just like, hey, where did you get that stencil? Hey, what glaze is that? Hey, how did you do that? It's like, well, hold on. Like years of research might have gone into that. Yeah. And maybe they're not ready to share that yet. And that's okay. I just went that was a completely different.
No, that's totally fair, because that's another issue that I see all the time. Like people are excited and I get it. Like one of the examples is that sometimes students are so curious about firing, but they don't have the base knowledge of ceramics to really understand how complicated it is to fire, especially the kind of kiln that Master Kim has. It's a gas kiln like any other gas kiln, but like firing Celadon has its own things, and you have to understand reduction, and then you have to understand like the components in clay. Like it's all scaffolded, but then people just want to know and like get out of there and know, and that's not how that works. It's just like it's not a transactional, like I pay you money and you show me things.
Which all kind of feels full circle and connected to the through line of this whole conversation, I feel like, is just the awareness of how much time it takes to get good at this crazy craft. And to, whether that be learning from someone, whether that be practicing yourself, whether that be preparing to sell things, whatever. It's just a long game, despite what Instagram makes it look like.
Yeah. Did I tell you what I told my students, like when they can sell things?
I don't think so.
So the amount of time that you put into something for the first bit is not going to be reflected in your final object for a very long time. And there's going to be a switch where the amount of time that you put into something is going to be evident in your final object, saying that the object is going to look good, I hope. What good is, I don't know, but you're not going to feel like there's going to be a point in time where you're not going to feel like I put so much time into this and I still can't get it right. I put so much time into this and it still looks like I've only been doing this for 2 weeks. And I think that's the point where I think you could start consider selling. But if you're still at a point where you're like, I put so much time into this object and I can only sell it for this much money, and like hopefully there is a self-awareness that it doesn't really stand up to some of the other work that's out there or to like your best potential. And that's like too early to sell, I think. But then it gets to a point where like you took this much time to get to a point where you can make things this efficiently and this well. And there's like only so much you can charge for, say, a mug and have it realistically sell. And that's when you sort of have to reevaluate, like, do I still want to do this? What things can I make more efficiently? What processes can I streamline? But until you get to that point where like your craft aligns with the labor, it's probably better to keep practicing.
Love it. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for taking so much time with me over the course of multiple times. I'm just going to use the word time as many times as possible. Where should we send everyone on the internet to see these beautiful pieces that you are making when you do fire them?
If I do post them, I am mentally in the process of getting ready to be in the process of starting my website again. So that will be posted in my bio eventually, but I just do everything through Instagram. Like I know so many artists who are doing really well who don't have a website. So that is just Gloria Han Art.
Perfect. We'll link it there.
Yeah.
I'm going to not start a new subject of how like, yeah, you can keep things simple. You don't have to have a custom made website. If it's working, it's working. Whatever. Oh, where we ended has me all kinds of worked up, my friends. Maybe it's just the years as a musician before I was even a photographer, let alone a potter, that taught me to put up with delayed gratification. But I cannot speak highly enough of not completing more work, of appreciating the process for what we can learn from it, and then just cutting the darn pot in half. Not only does this obviously help with waste when we can still recycle the clay before it's fired, especially if you're trying to be more environmentally conscious in your practice, but it also helps endlessly with the struggle that so many of us have in the fact that ceramics accumulates in our homes, and we don't always have that much storage space, right? We don't know what to do with the stuff that we're making. So, of course, we open up an Etsy shop and we start selling, but maybe we start selling before we're really ready. And I can really easily come up with that example because it's exactly what I did when I first got into clay years ago. But this is an entirely different subject that really needs its own episode altogether, so we will leave that for another day. As always, if you're looking for a way to continue these conversations with other makers from all over the world, if you don't want to wait for me to be able to queue up more episodes because I know many of you listen to them faster than I can produce them, you can find an incredible group of colleagues that support one another on this journey, whether you're a hobbyist, a side hustler, a full-timer, a beginner, someone who's been making for decades. You just need to check out the community. It's our online home and my personal favorite place on the internet. But I'm obviously completely biased. So you can learn more and hear about the experiences of other makers who are members that are far less biased than I am by visiting makersplaybook.com/community. Once again, this episode was made possible in part by our sponsor, Amico.
Hello, I'm Bryce, Account Manager and Sales Solution Supervisor at Amico Brett, providing you with the best customer service in ceramics. This episode is brought to you by Amico Brett. Find Amico glazes and equipment at your local distributor. Welcome to Clay, and thank you for listening.
Audio post-production of this podcast is made possible by help from Christy Kotzfan, with promotional material assistance from Queenie Maliki. The Maker's Playbook podcast is recorded on the original homelands of the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee people, where the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. Until next time, my friends, go get back to making your dreams a reality, because together, we've got this.